Saudi Arabia is one of the few countries on Earth trying to rebuild its entire identity before the old one stops working. For most of the modern world, Saudi Arabia meant oil, desert, royal family, Mecca, OPEC, Aramco, giant reserves, American alliances, and a state that could turn energy into geopolitical power. That image was real. Oil made Saudi Arabia rich, important, feared, protected, and constantly watched. It gave the country money, leverage, and a seat at almost every serious conversation about energy. When oil prices moved, Saudi Arabia mattered. When OPEC made decisions, Saudi Arabia mattered. When the world worried about inflation, fuel, wars, or supply shocks, Saudi Arabia mattered. But the Saudi leadership understands something simple: oil is powerful, but it is not a permanent identity. The world is changing. Electric cars are growing, governments are pushing cleaner energy, investors are thinking about climate, and younger Saudis cannot live forever inside an economy built mainly around hydrocarbons and state spending. Even if oil remains important for decades, the question is no longer whether Saudi Arabia can sell crude. The question is whether it can build a country that still matters when oil is no longer enough. That is the real story of Saudi Arabia today. It is not just a rich oil kingdom. It is a country trying to convert oil money into a new economic machine before history forces it to. This is why Vision 2030 exists. On the surface, Vision 2030 looks like a government plan full of tourism projects, new cities, entertainment zones, sports investments, factories, airports, hotels, and financial targets. But underneath the branding is something much more serious. Saudi Arabia is trying to turn oil wealth into permanent relevance. That is hard because oil did not only fund the economy, it shaped the country's habits. For decades, the state could use oil revenue to build infrastructure, fund public jobs, subsidize life, support citizens, and project power abroad. That created stability, but it also created dependence. If the government is the main engine, private business grows differently. If oil pays the bills, productivity can stay weaker than in countries forced to compete. If the state has enough money, reform can be delayed. Saudi Arabia is now trying to change that pattern without breaking the country. The scale is enormous. The Public Investment Fund, the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, has become one of the main tools of transformation. It is not acting like a normal investment fund that simply buys stocks and waits for returns. It is being used as a builder of new industries: tourism, entertainment, sports, gaming, renewable energy, advanced manufacturing, logistics, aviation, real estate, and technology are all part of the same push. This is why Saudi Arabia suddenly seems to be everywhere. Football stars move there. Golf gets pulled into Saudi-backed money. Boxing events happen in Riyadh. Formula One races there. New resorts appear on the Red Sea. Huge construction projects are announced in the desert. International investors are invited. Western consultants fly in. Global companies are told that if they want regional business, they should take Saudi Arabia seriously. To outsiders, some of this looks like spectacle. But Saudi Arabia is using spectacle as strategy. A country that was once closed, conservative, and hard for tourists to imagine is trying to become visible, visitable, and unavoidable. The old Saudi brand was energy and religion. The new brand wants to add entertainment, tourism, business, sports, luxury, technology, and youth culture. That shift is not cosmetic. It is economic survival. More than half of Saudi citizens are young. They need jobs, housing, culture, opportunity, and a reason to believe the future is bigger than government salaries and oil cycles. A country with a young population cannot rely only on the old model. It has to create sectors where people can work, build companies, spend money, and imagine a different life. That is why social change and economic change are connected. Women driving, cinemas reopening, concerts, Festivals, mixed public spaces, tourism visas, new entertainment districts, these changes are not just about lifestyle. They make the country more investable and more livable. If Saudi Arabia wants global talent, tourists, companies, and young citizens to participate in the new economy, the country has to feel different from the Saudi Arabia of the past. But change in Saudi Arabia is not happening like a Western democracy. It is happening from the top down, very fast, under a centralized leadership that wants speed and control at the same time. That makes the transformation powerful but also risky. The most famous example is NEOM. NEOM is not just a city project. It is a symbol of Saudi ambition at its most extreme. The idea is to build a futuristic region in the northwest of the country with renewable energy, advanced technology, tourism, new urban design, and global investment. The line became the most viral part, a proposed linear city that looked almost unreal, like something from science fiction. That is why NEOM is perfect for understanding Saudi Arabia. It shows both the ambition and the danger. The ambition is obvious. Saudi Arabia does not want to copy the past. It wants to announce the future before it fully exists. It wants to attract attention, capital, and talent by saying that the desert can become a laboratory for a new way of living. The danger is also obvious. Enormous projects can become too expensive, too complicated, or too disconnected from reality. Building a futuristic city is not like making a promotional video. You need engineering, workers, supply chains, water, energy, housing, transport, demand, governance, and people who actually want to live there. This is the central tension of Saudi Arabia's new strategy. Money can start a project. It cannot guarantee that the project becomes a real economy. A city is not successful because it is announced. It is successful when people live there, companies operate there, families stay there, tourists return there, and private capital keeps moving even without constant state support. That is the test. The same test applies to tourism. Saudi Arabia has real advantages: the Red Sea coast, desert landscapes, ancient sites like Alula, religious tourism through Mecca and Medina, and a location connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. But turning those advantages into a global tourism industry is not automatic. Dubai already owns part of that image. Qatar used the World Cup to boost its global profile. Abu Dhabi has capital, museums, and events. Egypt has history and the Red Sea. Turkey has Istanbul, beaches, and medical tourism. Saudi Arabia is entering a crowded market. Its strategy is to go huge. Luxury resorts, new airports, entertainment cities, heritage projects, international events, and massive marketing are meant to change the mental picture people have of the country. Instead of only thinking about oil or religion, Saudi Arabia wants people to imagine beaches, concerts, sports, business conferences, desert resorts, and futuristic skylines. If that works, tourism becomes more than visitors. It becomes a new national image. But there is another side. Saudi Arabia's global reputation remains complicated. Human rights issues, political repression, the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the war in Yemen, restrictions on dissent, and the treatment of activists all remain part of how many people see the country. Sports, events, and luxury projects can attract attention, but they also attract criticism. The more Saudi Arabia enters global culture, the more global culture argues about Saudi Arabia. This is why the country's rise is not clean or simple. It is not a fairy tale about modernization. It is a power project. Saudi Arabia is trying to diversify its economy, secure its monarchy, employ its youth, expand its influence, and reshape its reputation at the same time. Those goals overlap, but they are not identical. Sometimes economic openness grows while political control stays tight. Sometimes social freedoms expand in daily life while public criticism remains dangerous. Sometimes the country looks more modern without becoming more liberal in the Western sense. That contradiction is part of the Saudi model. The Country wants transformation without losing control. And so far, control is central to how the transformation works. The state can move fast because it does not need to negotiate every project through a fragmented political system. It can launch gigaprojects, reorganize sectors, push investment, rewrite rules, and force attention. That speed is an advantage. It is also a weakness. Top-down development can create impressive infrastructure, but it can also misread demand. If a project is built because leadership wants it, not because the market proves it, the risk is waste. The question for Saudi Arabia is whether its new sectors can become self-sustaining, or whether they will keep depending on oil-funded state capital. That is where oil returns to the center of the story. Saudi Arabia is trying to move beyond oil using money from oil. This is not hypocrisy. It is the only logical path. The country's current advantage is the same resource it wants to become less dependent on. Oil gives Saudi Arabia the capital to build airports, cities, funds, companies, and tourism zones. Without oil money, Vision 2030 would be far smaller. But that creates a race against time. If oil prices are high, the government has more room to spend, invest, and absorb mistakes. If oil prices fall for long enough, budgets tighten and giant projects become harder to fund. That means the diversification plan is still partly exposed to the same oil cycle it is trying to escape. This is the hardest part of the Saudi story. The country is building a future beyond oil, but the speed of that future still depends on oil. That does not mean the plan is fake. Saudi Arabia has already changed in visible ways. Non-oil sectors have grown, tourism is expanding, entertainment has exploded, and the country is much more open to foreign visitors than it was a decade ago. Riyadh feels like a city being pushed into a new era at high speed. But building durable economic depth takes longer than building landmarks. Japan took decades to become an industrial power. South Korea took decades to turn poverty into technology and culture. Singapore took decades to become trusted. The UAE took decades to become a global hub. Saudi Arabia wants to compress that process into a short historical window, using capital and central planning as accelerators. That can work in some sectors, but not everywhere. You can buy football players quickly. You can host a boxing match quickly. You can build luxury hotels if you have enough money. But you cannot instantly buy an innovation culture, a deep private sector, export competitiveness, world-class productivity, or a society where people take business risks at scale. Those things have to develop. This is why the next phase matters. More than the announcement phase, Saudi Arabia has already shown it can get attention. The harder question is whether it can turn attention into lasting capability. Can Saudi companies compete globally without state protection? Can tourism attract repeat visitors, not just curiosity? Can manufacturing become export-driven? Can young Saudis build private businesses at scale? Can foreign investors trust the legal and political environment long-term? Can the country create enough high-quality jobs for its citizens? Can the new economy survive weaker oil prices? Those are the real questions, and yet, Saudi Arabia has advantages many countries would love to have. It has capital, land, energy, strategic location, a young population, religious significance, state capacity, and global attention. It sits near major trade routes close to Africa, Europe, and Asia. It has the two holiest cities in Islam, which gives it a kind of spiritual centrality no other country can copy. It also has one of the most important oil companies on earth, Saudi Aramco, which remains a financial engine even as the country talks about the future beyond oil. That combination is rare. Saudi Arabia is not starting from weakness. It is trying to transform from strength before that strength becomes less secure. That is why the story is so dramatic. Most countries reform after they collapse. Saudi Arabia is trying to reform while still powerful. The old Saudi Arabia could afford to be closed because the world needed its oil. The new Saudi Arabia wants the world to need more than that. its capital, its cities, its events, its logistics, its tourism, its technology ambitions, and its market. If it succeeds, Saudi Arabia becomes one of the most important transformation stories of the 21st century. A conservative oil kingdom turns into a diversified regional superpower with global cultural and economic reach. If it fails, the country may end up with expensive landmarks, unfinished dreams, and an economy still tied too tightly to the thing it tried to outgrow. That is why Saudi Arabia is fascinating. It is not simply rich. It is not simply modernizing. It is not simply authoritarian. It is not simply buying sports or building cities. It is trying to redesign the relationship between oil, power, society, and the future. The desert kingdom that once sold the fuel of the 20th century now wants to buy its place in the 21st, and the whole world is watching because the outcome matters far beyond Saudi borders. If Saudi Arabia pulls this off, it will prove that oil wealth can be converted into a new national model before the old one loses force. If it cannot, it will become a warning that money can build almost anything except time.